So we don't just import criminals, we export criminals as well as a nation, Eamon. But we heard a really interesting case last week as a number of Irishmen were, I think it was said in court that they were about to leave Australia when they were arrested by police in connection with it is alleged, as a very highly and sophisticated home burglary ring, really.
Yeah, I mean, the three Irish guys aged 19, 20 and 24, they were in a hotel next to Melbourne International Airport. So police presumed that they were about to leave. And they think they're suspected of being involved in up to 60 burglaries, all in areas, neighbourhoods of Melbourne that are considered upmarket. They targeted things like cash and jewellery and designer handbags to the tune of $1 million Australian dollars, which is about 600,000 euro worth of goods. So, I mean, it's not insignificant. They talked about them being highly organised, sophisticated. They talked them, they suspect them as being part of a wider internationally based gang that are involved in this in a number of other countries. Yeah. They were using cleaning products and bleach to try and cover their tracks. They would sit and wait and watch the homes to make sure they were empty. They did their homework.
Yeah, so the three that were charged in court were a guy called Christie McDonagh, another guy called Michael McDonagh, and a guy called James Connors. And they're all, guys and young men. I mean, I think it's very significant that it was said in court as well, they'd only been in the country a very short space of time. I don't know if they had an exact time, but talking about a couple of months, 2 to 3 months, I think. But they were able to amass that level of wealth, which is 1 million Australian dollars in a very short period of time, because there is huge money to be made doing these kind of burglaries if they're done right and quickly, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they're not stealing televisions or anything bulky, when they're going for cash and jewellery and, small designer items. And it's a pattern that we've seen in Ireland. I think, I had the unfortunate experience of being burgled myself, our own home, and that's exactly what they went looking for. Of course, they had thin pickings in our place, but,
right.
But this is what they go for, and they make it profitable by doing so many, and just the sheer prolific nature of the criminality is where the kind of the profitability comes in. That if you're doing one of these a week, you're doing a lot of risk for very little return. But if you're banging out 4 or 5 break-ins in a single night, like you're better chance of hitting the jackpot, of getting a particular individual property where you get 50 grand in a single swoop.
So how is it technically done? Because I think they described, they obviously picked a certain part of Melbourne, the suburbia really, wasn't it? Where, they would look at houses, wait for people to go out for the night. And, it was always said, wasn't it, Eamon, that they could be in and out of a house within 2 to 3 minutes. Like, you're not talking about, as you said, not dragging out, televisions or PlayStations or anything like that. They're really looking for gold jewellery, isn't it, and cash for the most part.
And they don't pick locks either. They'll go through a window, they'll jimmy open a door. If the alarm goes off, if cameras, are on, it doesn't matter. Yeah. I mean, if there's a siren that they can reach quickly, they'll smash it to stop it going off. Yeah. But they'll be gone in definitely less than 2 minutes, probably 60 seconds. Yeah. They'll be in and out. They know the kind of the hiding places people use. The idea of hiding stuff in your freezer is a bit redundant these days. I think, but they'll be up on that. Yeah. And just like there isn't, and like they try to make sure they're going into empty houses. Yeah. But there is an element of violence in that they kick doors in, and there may be somebody in there that they don't expect, and usually they would tend to kind of turn around on the heels and get out. Yeah. But we noticed with these three who are charged in Melbourne, they are charged with serious enough crimes. So the charges laid against them include aggravated home invasion, aggravated burglary, theft from motor vehicles, criminal damage, and false imprisonment. Yeah. So it does sound like that their modus operandi, just the sheer prolificism and not waiting around to double check that the house is empty, sometimes it does come back to bite them. Yeah. And it will end up in more serious charges if someone is in the house when you break in than if it's empty, because obviously you're putting someone in complete terror. Yeah. And they don't know what's coming towards them. They don't know if this gang are violent or not.
Because you see, obviously people think that the big money is to be made in the drugs business. And no doubt that is when you consider criminality. Like, if you want to get rich, that's the way to do it. But you've seen, haven't you, in these cab cases, and even in the case of Fat Andy Connors, who was, in fairness, never linked to any drugs himself, wasn't involved in the drugs trade, but people can amass millions, and even people on a mid-level can have enough to buy properties and to really make a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, look, Fat Andy was worth several million. I mean, a part of that, of course, was, the astute investment, at the early stages of the Celtic Tiger economy.
Yeah.
When he had plenty of cash, when, did not necessarily have to go to a bank.
Yeah.
So was legally flipping properties, but, these would have been originally bought with cash from stolen goods. And, you can certainly get rich. And it's a matter of just doing it day in, day out. Like we saw with some of them, they were lifestyle burglars. Fat Andy, when he was a millionaire, was still caught with a screwdriver standing in someone's garden in Leopardstown.
Yeah.
Like Pale Miley, his father, was caught. He was still breaking,
in a car,
in his late 70s, shortly before he died. So I mean, it's almost like a lifestyle. This is what you do. This is what they consider work, and these boys went out to Australia to work.
And the reason that they do go out, like, because they're Irish nationals, and the reason they do go is, there's only a certain amount of homes you can burgle in Ireland, I suppose, to some extent. And people obviously get known by the police. The way they work, the routes they use, all of that becomes sort of, it becomes easier to detect, I suppose, or at least the suspicion is on a smaller number of people. So we did see these gangs then migrate to England, where of course have a lot of may have relatives and friends living there anyway. Like there was a number of those gangs done in England, and that's been going on for years. But even in recent times,
and again, there's a direct connection between one of the gangs that were caught in Australia last year, Michael McInerney. And Michael McInerney, Bernard Connors and Edward McDonagh were caught for 6 burglaries in June 2023, again in Melbourne. And in that case, I think it was $25,000 cash jewellery and again handbags they were going for. Now, the thing was, McInerney, like just a couple of months before he entered Australia, had featured on the UK's Crime Watch.
Yeah.
So, it begs the questions of how these guys are able to, get through and travel internationally when they're, supposedly, on most wanted lists. So McInerney, he's linked then directly to Jonathan Connors, who is Fat Andy's son.
Yeah.
And I suppose a clue is that he's also wanted in Northumbria and Surrey, along with McInerney, for a whole series of burglaries and raids in which they cleverly, in a way, targeted. I think it was the owners of Chinese restaurants or Asian restaurants, and they had the sense that, or they had the idea that, some of these people wouldn't necessarily declare all their cash and would be keeping all their cash at home under the mattress. And what they did was they'd figure out who the boss was in the restaurants, and then they'd look where their car was parked and they put a tracker on it.
Yeah. And
they would follow them back to the house, see their house, wait for them to go back to the restaurant, and they'd raid the house. And they were doing this in a number of places in Scotland, in the north of England. They were also wanted over burglaries in the south. They're quite, again, really prolific. And of course, Connors himself, Jonathan, I think he must be coming near to the end of a sentence here in Ireland. He's involved in a car chase and ramming a Garda car, which ended up, I think it finished up in near Slane a couple of years back. And he got 3.5 years in Trim Circuit Court there about 3 years ago, I think, and is now 2.5 years ago. So he'd be due out of prison soon, but presumably he's still wanted in the UK. So whether or not he'll be sent back there, we'll have to wait and see if he's going to face charges there. But he's certainly still wanted by the UK police.
Yeah, and we've also seen a lot with some of these burglary gangs as they move across the jurisdictions. There's been changing of names. There's been lack of clarity about documentation in some of the cases. They seem to be able to get different documentation, or possibly just as simple and legitimately as having an English and Irish passport. But there does seem to be sometimes confusion arising to who is who even in some of these cases.
Yeah, and look, I mean, that's something that's been done for years in a way. I mean, it used to be, people tried to fool the system here in Ireland by using a Gaelic version of their name, which doesn't really work anymore. But certainly, I mean, to an awful lot of people in Ireland and the UK, the chances are, because it's a common travel area and you have family on both sides, and you may have had a parent born in one jurisdiction or the other, which would entitle you to a passport then from the other jurisdiction. So there's no doubt there's a lot of people have both, British and Irish passports. So if one is confiscated, or they can travel on another one with a slight variation of the name, and that might be enough to get them through. I mean, like, I suppose there's more biometrics being used now, so it is going to get harder. But sometimes it was simply a matter of people travelling on their siblings' passports. I know there was a case of some of these rogue traders based in London, again of Irish ethnicity, and they were wanted for, I think, ripping off old people, doing, basically the paving scams, and they were given bail, but managed to get out of the country using their relatives' passports.
Yeah.
So.
And we don't have, I can't remember what film I was watching, but they were talking about a fence who sells off the diamond rings or whatever. I mean, that's not really what's happening with these jewellery that's taken, is it? A lot of it is gold simply melted down and sold on. And there was obviously a boom in the price of gold following the recession, I think. Wasn't there? The price of gold went up, the raw price.
Yeah, I mean, and you would have seen those We Buy Gold shops kind of started popping up around the place. Most of them are gone now at this stage. But I mean, like, gold is always considered a safe haven for money, and when there's any kind of financial instability. I mean, but in terms of for people working with small amounts of gold, it doesn't really work. You have to have a decent amount of quantity. And I mean, and of course, if you have a piece of gold that's been melted down, it's harder then to link that back to a theft. Whereas if you still have something that has, to my dearest Niall engraved in it, it's going to be obvious that was what was stolen from you. But if it's melted down, it's done and dusted in that sense.
And obviously then the other thing that became like a funny thing that becomes valuable is the designer handbags, which is, some of them are incredibly costly. I'm unaware of exact names and prices myself, but they also became something that was really being targeted, wasn't it, in these burglaries?
Yeah, and I mean, look, they're small and they're easy to carry. And I mean, and in one sense, they're kind of handy to put the cash and jewellery you're stealing into as well. Yeah. So I mean, if you're stealing stuff from a house and putting it into a Louis Vuitton weekend bag, you're making money all around. And it's just as simple as that, I mean, and there's a ready market for it. So I mean, a lot of these guys, they don't operate in a vacuum.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a source a number of years ago. I was asking, how come some of the tarmac pavers and some of the scam artists, again, of an Irish background, how were they able to turn up in Australia and and within a day be in a van and on the road knocking on doors? And it was explained to me that there's one particular individual who used to be involved in a business in another part in Ireland, who moved to Melbourne and was back basically acting like the Halawa money laundering scheme.
Right, okay.
That you go and pay his cousins up in Louth or wherever it is, you give him a bag of money. Yeah. And then you get on your plane to Melbourne, and when you arrive there, you go and you knock on his door and you get your money back minus, a fee or whatever the costs. So, I mean, you don't have to take the risk of trying to fly to Australia with 50 grand or 60 grand in your pocket to get yourself set up. But I mean, it's a well-worn route. I mean, we wrote about some of the Rathkill rogue traders, I think it was in 2013. And they were out in it was like a rock and roll lifestyle. They were all boys together, going from hotel to hotel, wrecking the place, drinking every night, and selling dodgy generators, and really made the headlines there. And they ripped off people to the tune of $3,000-$4,000 at a time, and they lasted about 3 months before they legged it. But it certainly, there's been other Irish groups. I mean, even in the recent cab stuff, with the one Mary Cash. Yeah. And I mean, she was trying to explain that the house that she had that was being targeted by the Criminal Assets Bureau in Portlaoise was bought from, herself and her husband had worked legitimately in Australia.
And not so legitimately. Well, she said she'd worked
as an escort and as a cleaner and a childminder.
Yeah.
Now, her husband, Andrew Cash, and her brother, Henry Kiley, they were named in the evidence affidavits from the Criminal Assets Bureau as part of, a serious organised criminal gang that were involved in burglaries all over the south and southeast of Ireland. Again, these kind of high-speed car chases, very much the similar modus operandi of the Pale Miley gang. They're kind of, they're reckless. And again, prolific. And this is, and they've no fear of the police. They've no fear of the guards. They've no fear of other people, of hurting other people. If they, in terms of their reckless driving, they've no fear for themselves.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I think there's a thing of collecting charges, isn't it? You do see with these types of sort of crimes, because people do get out, and once they're already charged with something, it seems that they almost collect a few others that'll maybe get dealt with concurrently or something like that, or consecutively, you know?
Well, I suppose, yeah, sometimes you might be better off like trying to get, if you know you've already been caught on something, just not fighting it, and hopefully then that you'll get a concurrent sentence, rather than trying to resist it, getting out of jail, and then getting arrested for the one that you didn't put your hand up to, and getting a new jail sentence when, you know, you could have had it dealt with and possibly run at the same time as something you're already, you know, being caught for. Well, I mean, there was one kind of insight again into how these gangs work. I don't know if you remember Darren Joey O'Halloran, his gang. They were Limerick based, and there was a bunch of them caught in the UK. Now, he got 12 years. They did 54 houses in 3 months. It was totaling about £350,000 of again, jewellery and cash and designer goods that they stole. But in this case, there was a good bit of video evidence that kind of emerged from it. And it gave you a real insight into, I suppose, how quickly they work. Like, you know, it was literally going straight through a door. You know, 3 guys running in 3 different directions. One like heading for under the stairs. I think in one video, it kind of there must have been some kind of knowledge of where a secret compartment would be. They went straight to it. You know, the third guy runs straight upstairs, and they're gone in 30 seconds. You got a real sense. They were caught on one CCTV. Then they were using a fairly high-powered, an Audi A6 or an Audi R6. Sorry, I'm not good at my cars.
No.
And they were seen, like, you know, changing the plates. So they were using this high-powered car to make sure if they were confronted by any, you know, ordinary police, certainly they could do a runner. They'd be able to get away, because, I mean, you know, police officers aren't going to, you know, go at 200 miles an hour to try and catch these guys, because it's just simply unsafe. So they usually back off, unless there's a helicopter that can kind of keep track and more units can surround them. And that was the way to work. But you got a real sense of, I think in that case, it was probably one of the few times where we were able to link all the you know, I think there was 13 or 14 burglaries that they're actually charged with. And there was a lot of video evidence to go with this. And it was the first time you really got an insight into how they worked. And it's quite frightening, I'd say, for any householder who ends up...
Absolutely.
You know,
I mean, people really feel
them.
violated, and, you know, when their houses are broken into like this. Obviously, these 3 men, Christie McDonagh, Michael McDonagh and James Connors, have not pled yet. These are allegations against them in a court. It'll go to trial. I don't know if there's any specific times at which...
back to August now, I think, remanded to August. So next time we'll hear anything about any progression in the case will be then.
Yeah, well, we keep an eye on it. It's certainly a very interesting case. So
I might even take a trip out.
Will you? Yeah. Well,
what do you think now?
I don't think so, Eamon, is the answer. Worth a try, though.
I'll do my best. Maybe people will write in and vote.
Maybe they will. You can crowdfund, maybe. Eamon.
Cheers, Niall. Always a pleasure.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.